Hey, it's Marcus from Holosuite. Today I'm going to talk about loudness in ambient music. So how loud should we be mastering our ambient music? I think the easiest way to tell this is to look at music that's already been mastered and we'll go from there. So today I'm going to use Spotify as the basis. So I'm going to be looking at the LUFS values for tracks that are up on Spotify to see what kind of LUFS levels these tracks are getting to. And it's important to note that I have turned off loudness normalization on Spotify. So this is how it came in when it got into Spotify, as far as I understand. I've picked quite a few different tracks from different styles of ambient. So we've got more minimal stuff and then a bit more maximalist stuff. And we'll look at what these different tracks are looking like from a loudness standpoint. So I've started with the most famous artists, I guess. I've started with John Hopkins for the music for psychedelic therapy. So we're peaking at about maybe 11 to 10 LUFS at the very loudest. So it's surprisingly loud. It's louder than the -13 that Spotify wants us to master at. So that's an interesting start. So it is surprisingly loud. It's very dark content, but it's still managing to get pretty loud. Let's have a look at the next track. This is an oldie but a goodie, one of my favorite Onehotrix Point Never tracks from Returnal. All right, interesting. So this one's also peaking at around 10 LUFS, although it's got a lot more high frequency content, which is interesting to note. Let's have a look at our next one. This is Lawrence English, and this is a really dark track, but it's one of my favorite Lawrence English tracks, and I feel like this really characterizes the way that he masters. Oh yeah. All right, so this one is like a solid 8.5 LUFS. This is like really loud. But the most interesting thing about this, and I think this is why I like this track, is the balance of the frequencies in this track. So let's just have another quick listen and just watch this in the Q3, the analyzer. It is so dark. Look at that. There's this huge drop off after about 4 kilohertz. I think this is probably his secret to getting it so loud, because he's balanced out the bass and the mids in such a nice way that he can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. There's no high frequency content to unbalance it. It just keeps, you can just keep like absolutely slime it. All right, let's keep going. Benoit Pioulard. I'm hoping I'm getting that right. This is from his new album, Sunder. So we're sitting at about 13 LUFS. So this is relatively quiet comparatively. It doesn't have a lot of high frequency stuff. It makes it seem a little bit quieter when you're listening to it too. Now this one, Ben Frost, look, I don't know if you want to consider him to be an ambient musician. I've picked a track that is particularly dynamic just because I wanted to show that you can have quite a lot of high frequency content in your master and still have it be relatively quiet. Let's see what this goes. This is much more aggressive content than a lot of the previous tracks we've just auditioned, but this one, surprisingly, is just about as quiet as the John Hopkins or the Benoit Pioulard. It's around -13 LUFS for most of the time, which is really interesting. So it goes to show that a good balanced mix can have can actually still be very quiet and still have a lot of impact, right? We still feel this track, we still feel all the textures, and everything is very prominent in this track, but it's also not particularly loud. Onto Fennesz, another one of my favorites. So this is kind of similar to the Ben Frost in that it has quite a lot of high frequency content. It's a lot more kind of aggressive sounding, but paradoxically, this one is actually much louder. Personally, I don't think that there's necessarily any huge difference in the way that we perceive it. It's just an interesting note, really, that you can make it much louder and it still sounds just as good as the Ben Frost. I've gone into just a few more, a bit maybe esoteric tracks just to see what other people are doing these days in the more independent ambient scene. So this is Kilometre Club with from his new album At Dusk Hour the Crickets. So this is super quiet, and my preference would be that we could probably pull this up at least a few dB to get it at least up into the 0 mark, just so that it stays relatively consistent with other tracks, because it does feel a little bit quieter than the other tracks. But yeah, there's absolutely no dynamics control happening on this one. It's got so much headroom. Let's go to 6 Missing. Wow, this one is considerably louder. We're going like up into the 8 and 9 LUFS. This is probably what I would like to have seen with the Kilometre Club, because once again, it doesn't seem that it's like a particularly dynamically restricted. It's just interesting to note the choices that different mastering engineers or artists make when they're mastering their music. These are a couple that I've mastered, just for some comparisons. This is Brett Naucke from Cast a Double Shadow. So we're peaking at about -10 LUFS here with pretty dynamic material. There's a lot of kind of fun things happening in the top end. And this is my kind of personal preference because I'm more of like a maximalist ambient artist. So I prefer it to be a little bit louder to have that more impact on you, right? And the last one I'll put in is one of my tracks. So. And this one's also at about -10, -11. Although interesting to note that this isn't as dynamically varied as Brett Naucke was. So I would say that I probably was just unconsciously aiming for that sound. I aim for around this level when I'm mastering, regardless of the material, unless it's particularly aggressive and I really want it to kind of kick you in the face. So what should we take from this? Well, I think the first thing to note is that it's important that the loudness level matches the music that you're working with. So whether it's particularly dynamic material or whether it's particularly like just kind of droney stuff, you need to make sure that whatever you're making, that you don't over compress it so that it doesn't sound squished, basically. When it comes to ambient music, I don't use that much compression or limiting anyway, as I've probably mentioned in previous videos. The other thing I would note is that, as we've gathered from playing all these tracks, that an average ambient album will be somewhere between -13 to -10 LUFS. So anywhere in that will be particularly normal, and you're not going to be forcing people to turn things up or down too much. And I guess the last thing to note about all of this is that a good master that goes to the right loudness level is one that is as balanced as possible in the EQ spectrum. If there's too much low end or too much top end, it's going to eat up that headroom, which means that you won't be able to push it as loud as you want. So something that has a lot of low end will start peaking and start hitting that 0 decibel or start engaging your limiter much earlier than it would if it was properly balanced, which means that you can't get it as loud, right? The bass will be hitting the top, and then everything else won't be able to catch up with it. So you need to make sure that it's as balanced as possible to allow everything to go up together. I hope this was helpful. Please don't forget to check the link in the description, which has access to my free resources, and it also has a link to request a free master sample done by me. And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe so I can keep making these kinds of tutorials for you. And until next week, keep making music. Cheers.